Then I just do my Spanish, you berate me, and then we end it after that.
I didn't read that you're doing Spanish and I needed to berate at the end, but all right, I'll berate.
You do that. You do that very well. Ahoy hoy, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk. My name is Shaun Slomo Polidano, and we're back for another week of brilliant F1 racing at the Barcelona Grand Prix in Spain. Joining me as always is the Zorra himself, Aaron Best.
I see we're going Eurovision today.
Yeah, we're going to go and teach everyone some Spanish Eurovision songs, so I thought, let's start with that. I was clutching with straws as to figuring out what to go and theme this episode, so I thought, why not combine my two loves together, Eurovision and F1? So, sold.
All right, let's go.
All right, well, Spain has taken part at Eurovision for over 60 years. Fun fact, bam, wow, awesome. Now, Chanel's performance of Slomo scored Spain its podium finish, their best result in 27 years. How exciting. Now, who remembers the last Catch-Up Girls? Raise your hand. No one's raising their hand. Aaron's not crowd participating this week. Their Eurovision song sucked and came in 21st place in 2006. And my final Spanish Eurovision fact is, my all-time favorite Spanish entry was in 2012, with the iconic and powerful performance from Pastora Salora Cuatro Camino. Stay with me. I probably butchered that, but hey, you know what? Spanish, I'm learning.
I don't even know Spanish and I can tell you butchered that.
Oh, well, guess what? We're going to be adding that throughout the episode too.
We take our listeners on some interesting tangents here.
You know what? We like to gay, zig, zag, boom, and bang. You know, our podcast is amazing for just doing that. Let's turn our thoughts and review onto the Spanish Grand Prix. This is the first race of a triple header with Austria and Britain, which means the teams are working overtime. And the Formula One life is very, very busy.
It's also been a very busy time for the two of us, to the point that we're actually recording this episode out of position and we've already watched the entire triple header, only now just getting time to jump into the studio to record the episode.
Right. I've almost forgotten what happened during the race.
I think maybe we should quickly refresh ourselves before we get started.
Oh, I like a refreshment. Let's go and do that.
5 hours later.
And we're back. So this weekend, we have another standard race weekend of 3 free practice sessions, a qualifying session, and then the Grand Prix on Sunday. Every episode, you hear me repeat almost this exact sentence about the sessions from the weekend. So what exactly are practice sessions and why are they important? Free practice sessions, or FP1, FP2, and FP3 as we call them, are crucial for a variety of reasons. These sessions give the teams and drivers a chance to gather essential data and fine-tune their setups ahead of qualifying and the race. During these sessions, teams can test different tyre compounds, adjust aerodynamics, and tweak suspension settings to find the optimal balance for the car. They also use this time to run through race simulations, practice their pit stops, and assess fuel loads. All of this information is vital for making strategic decisions come race day. The drivers themselves also use the sessions to refamiliarize themselves with the layout, assess the conditions of the track, and find their preferred racing line for their driving style. This is even more important when the tracks have been resurfaced or modified since the last time they were there. Now, this weekend we saw a large number of teams bringing upgrades to their car. So why is the Circuit de Barcelona-Catalunya such a valuable track for teams to try and bring upgrades? Well, this track is incredibly familiar to all the drivers and teams because it is frequently used for preseason testing. The familiarity with the circuit means that teams have a wealth of historical data to compare against any new upgrades they bring. The circuit is also known for its mix of high-speed straights, technical corners, and varying elevation changes, making it a perfect testing ground for evaluating how upgrades perform under different conditions. Whether it's a new front wing, a revised diffuser, or updated suspension components, teams can get a comprehensive understanding of how these changes impact their car's performance. Moreover, the predictable weather conditions in Spain during the race weekend provide a consistent environment for testing. This consistency helps teams to accurately measure the effectiveness of their upgrades without the variable of changing weather skewing the data. It's no surprise that many teams choose to debut significant upgrades at this track. Free practice sessions are an integral part of the Formula One weekend, allowing teams to gather critical data and optimize their car. They also give us a glimpse into what may happen over the course of the weekend, and although they don't feature much racing, They can be an interesting insight into the technical direction the teams are heading in over the season.
All right, kids, grab your churros. We've got a very exciting race summary for you this week. Let's start with free practice 1. Norris led the pack with his rapid McLaren, setting the fastest time. Verstappen followed in P2, and one of the home heroes, Sainz, took P3. Unfortunately, Alonso had a rough start at his home race weekend, taking too much of the curb and destroying his front wing, which brought out the red flag. Let's also not forget that Oliver Bierman was back in an F1 car this weekend, replacing Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas. Free practice 2 saw the Mercedes drivers shine, with both Hamilton and Russell delivering strong performances. Norris continued his impressive form, securing the third fastest time. Verstappen, however, seemed to struggle with his car setup, finishing in P5. Free practice 3 was dominated by Sainz, who clocked the fastest time. A peculiar incident occurred when Leclerc bumped into Norris during the final run. Despite having plenty of room to pass, though, Norris ended up in P2 and Leclerc ended up settling for P3. As we move to qualifying, it's handy to know that the VCARB team brought new upgrades over the weekend. Sadly, those upgrades didn't translate into fast times, with both drivers failing to make it past Q3. Q2 was a disappointment for Aston Martin, as both drivers missed the cut, with Alonso narrowly missing out on Q3 by 0.019 seconds. Verstappen led the timesheets in Q2, followed by Hamilton and then Russell. The battle for P1 in the final stages of qualifying was nothing short of spectacular. Norris secured his second pole position of the year ahead of Verstappen and Hamilton. It was a fierce and thrilling bullfight right to the end. Now we come to race day. Race day at the Spanish Grand Prix was nothing short of electrifying. The start was a whirlwind of unexpected moves. Norris instantly tried to cut off Verstappen, but Verstappen held his ground down the long straight. Russell, taking advantage of the slipstream and a great start, executed a brilliant move, passing them both into turn 1. Pure racing brilliance. The Ferrari drivers seemed too focused on battling each other, allowing Mercedes to seize the opportunity to challenge for a podium position. A significant moment came on lap 19 when Hamilton used DRS to overtake Sainz. Tyre strategy proved to be very crucial, with Norris on fresher rubber battling Russell for an entire lap before securing P2 from Mercedes. Hamilton, on soft tyres, overtook Russell on hards in the race's final stages. In a strategic move, Ferrari swapped their drivers to ensure Leclerc gained more points in the Drivers' Championship. As the checkered flag waved, it was Verstappen in P1, Norris in P2, and Hamilton rounding out the podium in P3. A special shout out to Hamilton, whose competitive spirit in the Mercedes was truly commendable this weekend. Away from the track, there was significant news in the paddock. Alpine has hired Flavio Briatore, a controversial figure in F1. Many will remember his suspension from FIA racing in 2008 for orchestrating a crash during the Singapore Grand Prix to secure a win for his Renault team and for the second driver. His return has certainly raised eyebrows across the motorsport community. Alrighty, I'm feeling full after that delicious Spanish paella. Now, Aaron, what was your highlight of the race?
I think for me, it was watching the Ferrari drivers battle it out. Even just the highlights of the race were them fighting with each other more than other drivers fighting with them. They left a lot on the table for other drivers and other teams to pick up, which is really disappointing to see.
Yeah, whilst it's exciting for us casual viewers and fans of F1 to see the two Ferraris battling it out, again, this whole season is going to come down to those Constructors' Championship points, and them fighting each other is just going to either cause A, a crash, or B, that they're squabbling against one another and they're losing pace to those top teams.
They also had a moment after a session had finished. I can't remember exactly which session it was, one of the free practices, I think, where Leclerc cut off Norris in this really weird way and they bumped wheels. Like, they're odd risks that the team are taking.
Yeah, I think Ferrari just struggled, with the entire weekend, and that was free practice 3. Don't get me wrong, you saw glimmers of hope with Sainz doing pretty well in free practice 3 and doing a very good run on that part. Things might be changing with the constructors lineup, and them securing P5 and P6 respectively is a decent result for probably what was a very average weekend.
Yes, getting P5 and P6 is a good result. Obviously, it'd be better if one of the drivers was up at the very front of the pack, but it could be worse. You could be getting first and 18th or whatever Perez ended up at.
I think Perez came in P8. Again, still within the points, but that big disparity on first to 8 is not helping Red Bull at all with their Constructors' Championship.
No, Red Bull are really starting to struggle, and you're hearing that over the radio, particularly now that they don't have this competitive car. You're hearing Max talk over the radio and you can hear the stress in his voice as he's racing. You can hear the stress in a lot of the drivers' voices, which is really interesting. It almost feels like the races are just that little bit more exciting now that there's like the blood in the water that they can potentially all win a race.
Oh, blood in the water. That's a weird saying.
Haven't you heard that before?
Piranhas?
Well, sharks.
Oh, piranhas.
Like sharks can smell the blood in the water and they come for it.
Come for it. Verstappen continues to very much shine though. Like, it's impressive on what he is able to go and do. It is slightly annoying though that he kind of looks to be, quotation marks, struggling with the car during those free practice sessions, only to then knock it out of the park during race day, which matters most.
Yes, he is struggling. I don't think he's necessarily knocking it out of the park. Like, he's no longer got those 30-second leads.
Mm-hmm.
I think the big difference is when we're watching the free practices, we're watching a lap and we're comparing that lap to a different lap, and we're comparing a different lap to a different lap because the drivers are stopping and starting, going into the pits, whatever it may be, same as in qualifying. Whereas in a race, we're not just seeing the speed against one lap, we're seeing the potential speed against 30, 40, 50 laps. And so it might be half a second a lap or whatever that may be. Half a second a lap over 50 laps, that's 25 seconds that Max can gain, which is why we used to see that. Now we're seeing that he has to make sure his strategy is right because he had a slow stop in this race at 3.6 seconds and it started to put pressure on him.
Yeah. I think even what you mentioned at the start there too, these free practice sessions are also data collection. And again, Red Bull might be tinkering and trying different things. So of course, we don't need to see dominance in all sessions. We just need to see dominance in the race because that's where you get your points.
Yeah, because they might not use a practice session to practice qualifying laps, which are the fast single laps with low fuel in the car. They might be focusing on long stints, and long stints historically will have a slightly longer lap time, and so they won't appear on the free practice timetables because of that.
What was your thoughts on Perez overall? Like, whilst he did secure P8, he didn't look very competitive in terms of trying to overtake any of the cars compared to something like Oscar Piastri, which kind of struggled at the start, but was able to go through the pack, passing Perez and get up to a decent spot at the end.
I think there was something odd going on with Perez. Like, you saw in free practice 1 that he came over the radio and he's like, there's something wrong with the car. It's not behaving properly or something like that. And normally when a driver comes over the radio and says something like that, the response is, okay, noted, or we'll get back to you, or confirmed, or something like that. And instead their response was, we'll talk about it in the garage.
Ooh.
I feel like they were also a little bit frustrated that Perez was struggling with the car when he shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So you're right. He's not being very competitive in the car, and it's starting to show. And I feel like Red Bull are starting to really have very little patience for him.
Yeah. Again, after a triple header, it will be interesting to see where things end up.
You say like we didn't watch all the triple header already.
Foresight is brilliant.
Hindsight, you numpty.
Any sort of sight is brilliant.
Hamilton's first podium of the season.
Yeah, great, right? So encouraging. I say that as a try.
Again, we know that he has a win.
Who cares about P3 in Spain when you can go win in the British Grand Prix? Woohoo!
But the Mercedes drivers are doing really well. The Mercedes team is doing really well. They are coming back to being front of the pack. They had a couple of years of slowing down and drifting further and further back, and they're no longer having that problem. They're consistently moving forward each week. And as we know, they will get themselves a win. They got themselves a win in Montreal the week before. So that's now 2 wins this season for a team that hadn't had wins in forever.
Yeah, I still think if we go back to talking about Mercedes, things were interesting. The build-up has been fantastic. We have seen the drivers kind of have those moments of not being on top of their game, like a couple of errors here or there. Now they've got a competitive package. They're both winning races. Russell must be a little bit pissed off, especially about this race, to lose out on tyre strategy here, especially if we're going on to those hards that seem to not be performing. Like, how do you go and manage that idea on which tyre choice to go and choose? Is it driver? Is it the team? Who do you then listen to? What's your thoughts?
I think we hear about it a lot that the drivers are probably the best people to be able to tell you what they're feeling under the car. Like, obviously data can tell you one thing, but the drivers will be able to tell you something else. So ultimately, it should be the drivers that make the decisions. I think the thing with Mercedes is they have a reputation of actually being probably one of the fairest teams as far as their two drivers go. Most teams would tend to favor their number one driver, even though Mercedes clearly do have a number one driver. They tend to treat their drivers quite well, which is why you kind of see moments where Russell has upgrades that Hamilton doesn't and things like that, because they give them both the opportunity to take the upgrades. I think it was a few races ago. It wasn't Canada. I think it was a race before.
Yeah, I think you are right on that one. But I think there was also, and again, we'll have to quote check on this one. I don't think Hamilton wanted to take those upgrades because he was wanting to be in that spec and he felt more confident and comfortable in that spec.
He didn't want to risk breaking Parc Fermé conditions. So if he took the front wing, because there was only one of them, they didn't have a spare. If he took the front wing, qualified with that front wing and damaged it during qualifying, he'd have to take a grid penalty.
Yeah.
Russell was willing to take that risk, but the opportunity was there for both the drivers to have the say and say, I want it.
So this is where I'm thinking where Hamilton is an absolute legend here because he would have figured out which tyre to then be on, being the experienced driver and the legend that he is, where Russell would have probably been told that the hard was going to be maybe better for the stint overall from team, which again cost him out at the end of it. Again, Mercedes has to be very, very happy for P3 and P4 for this weekend.
Even Red Bull were showing their amazing strategic skills, pitting late to get Verstappen onto soft so he could win and all those kinds of things that we're seeing. Strategy is becoming really important because the front of the pack is now so competitive. Last year, we would only talk really about what happened between positions 2 and 5. And now we're talking about what happened for P1. We don't know that Max is going to win every race. So each of the drivers is now a little bit more, I think, tense. You saw it in some of the free practice sessions. Anything that was happening, the drivers seemed really on edge. And you heard a couple of radio messages from Leclerc getting grumpy at where Stroll was. And then Hamilton got in the way of Stroll because he admittedly didn't see him. And Stroll got stroppy. Like, the drivers are all really pushing hard at the moment. And you can hear the tension because there is so much opportunity for them to potentially win a race now.
Yeah, I like the fact of Stroll got stroppy. It's got a nice ring to it.
I did love the cross from the two radios in replays. They had Stroll obviously then get hit by Hamilton or nudged by Hamilton. And Stroll's like, what the fuck is he doing? Blah, blah, blah. And then they cut to Hamilton's radio and you can see his hand. He gets up and waves and he's like, I didn't see him. My bad.
Sorry, mate. Didn't see you there. Don't know why Hamilton's got an Australian accent, but I felt right doing so. You quickly mentioned something about strategic. You know, we've been talking about tyres and everything around that. Ferrari's choice on switching their drivers at the end. My question is to you, A, do you think it's the right move to go and do? B, as a viewer and lover of F1, do you think it's the right thing to do?
Strategically, you do what you can to maximize points and to minimize the risk. We're talking about at the moment, if, for example, we had a race where Max and Checo were actually close to each other, there's no chance in hell that Red Bull would not say to Checo, you need to get out of the way of Max right now. Because if one position in front of Checo is available, they will put Max in that spot. So I think when it comes to other teams, yes, it can be a little bit more contentious because the drivers are so close to each other, but they're also wanting to see a driver take a higher position in the championship, and Leclerc's got that opportunity.
Yeah, again, at that point in time, Leclerc was very much looking quite hot for that second position, and we are now seeing that Norris has come up and swiped it away because of Ferrari's misfortunes over the last 3 weeks. Very important to give him as many points as you can, really. Yeah,
and that's the thing that Ferrari is really having to defend themselves from is McLaren clearly have a faster car, and the lead that Ferrari gave themselves at the start of the season is quickly diminishing. So they need to do something, and they need to do something both in the constructors and in the drivers' championships.
Yeah, and I think that falls onto the fact that their car is not working very well. The driver's not that confident in it, but hopefully next couple of races we'll see a return of Ferrari, or else what am I going to do with my Ferrari red cap and
yeah, I spent $60 on a t-shirt.
Yeah, and
more than $60 on a t-shirt.
And I love them, but it's just constant heartbreak.
Well, we'll see. We might have Hamilton next year, and I made sure specifically to get a t-shirt that didn't have a driver number on it.
Yeah, so that's fine. Yeah, that's easy for us. McLaren looked very strong. It was a very good weekend on their end.
They've clearly now got a car that is competitive with the Red Bull, and they're bringing upgrades. They're starting to really show what they can do. It's just now a matter of time for them to win more. And you can see, again, Norris has that drive behind him. He really wants to win. He's tasted it in Miami, and he's now got his second pole. He had a lot of opportunity. I think I read a statistic that of the 33 races that have been held at this circuit, 30 of them have been won from the front row. And now after this race, 31 out of 34. Norris getting pole position, that meant that this was a race between him and Verstappen statistically. And he had the opportunity there and he really tried.
Yeah. Speaking of trying too, like Piastri had an average qualifying with his time getting deleted in Q3, sending him to the bottom of that top 10. You know, he had a fantastic race, made up so much ground, good tyre strategy by the team, putting him in the right position. Plus, the overtakes that he did was just perfect. Again, love him, a driver to watch. He's only 2 years in. No, this is his second year.
This is his second year.
Second year.
We've talked about he's already got a win in a sprint race, and everyone's kind of just him winning a Grand Prix is just a matter of time, particularly now with this car.
Especially for such a young time racing. Like it's, well, not racing in general, but in F1, it's fantastic.
Yeah. I love you mentioned that his time got deleted, and I watched a replay of it recently. And
recently. Just a couple of minutes ago.
Just a couple of minutes ago. And the commentators, so it wasn't the Sky Sports footage that I was watching, it was Formula One footage. And the commentator was watching the lap that he got deleted. And they're like, okay, so this is the corner where he got his lap time deleted because he ran wide. And he's hit the apex and then he's coming out to the end of the corner. And they're like, oh yeah, you can see him running just a little bit wide. And then all of a sudden the entire car's in the gravel and they're like, or a lot wide.
Yeah.
And he comes back onto the track. The gravel caught a few drivers out this week during the first free practice.
I was too busy trying to figure out what was going on to even pay any sort of attention to gravel with our like quick watch of everything. So I'm glad you saw gravel. I don't.
We had a good race from Alpine. They're performing really, really well. Like even in qualifying, they did really well with Gasly managing to get into Q3. Ocon got into the top 10 only because of grid penalties for Perez.
Oh, nice.
So the Alpines, from shit boxes at the start of the season, they were a running gag that a Hyundai could drive faster than an Alpine at one point. And now they're firmly in the middle of the pack competing with the teams like Haas, who are also doing really well.
Yeah, it's just funny on how much development cycle takes into consideration here. Anything that happens at the start of the year is probably like, well, it's a moment in time, it's a foundation, and we just need to keep on building up. And that's where we're seeing, you know, the rise of Alpine coming on through. Haas have had a really good rise in terms of their development pipeline. But also on the flip side, things like Aston Martin and Ferrari seem to have started quite well, but their development has peaked down and they're not performing as well as they should be because they're not bringing the right upgrades here. So
I really feel like Ferrari, yes, are arguably getting worse. I feel like Aston Martin and even Williams and Sauber, even from where they are sitting, they're not necessarily getting worse. They're just not getting better. And when all the drivers around them, all the teams around them are getting better, not getting better means that you are falling further behind.
Yeah, which I think this is where it's credit to Alpine. They are doing changes to that car. That car is still probably a little bit heavy, still needs more aero, but it's working in the right direction, allowing them to score, what was it, P9 and I think P10 by the end of the race, which is very good points for both of those drivers, especially when they're competing against, as you said, Haas, Williams, pretty much V-carb for that kind of top part of the bottom teams.
Which, if you look at the RBs, they bought upgrades this weekend that did not work.
Yeah, like Tsunoda being at the back of the pack in the race, Daniel Ricciardo, okay, but I think it was like P16.
They both got knocked out early in qualifying. They weren't competitive in the race.
I think that's the hard part, was then getting knocked out so early in qualifying, which I think screwed everything up for them, especially with a couple of races before they were onto it and getting some consistent, really high Q3 times. But again, goes to that point of development. You know, if you're doing the gradual process and you're nailing those development milestones, your trajectory is going to be up. If you screw something up, you're way back at the back.
Yeah.
So hopefully V-Carb figures it all out and they kind of either change up those upgrades or goes back to the old spec of car.
For a team that we talk about how cutthroat Red Bull is and how much pressure they put on their drivers, and we know in the next few races that that's going to implode, it's important that the teams also deliver a car that's competitive, because you can't really judge a driver on poor performance if the team legitimately gave them a car that got worse than the last race.
Yeah, yes, but same could be kind of and said for maybe like Sargent and the Williams.
Sargent hasn't gotten a car that's gotten worse. They haven't bought upgrades in. He got the same spec as Albon this weekend, and Albon performed. Sargent didn't. Whereas you had RB, they brought upgrades to the cars for both Tsunoda and Ricciardo, and both drivers completely fell back because the car was fucked. Because the upgrades didn't work as expected or threw a spanner in the works, and RB just didn't know what happened.
Yeah. You know what? It's just grateful that we have Williams actually bringing cars to the track, because out of the first couple of races, I barely think that we're going to have any development budget to create a new car.
At one point, they were pretty much just going to start bringing cardboard boxes because that's all they could afford after all the repair bills.
It's sad to say because I love Williams as a team. You know, they're not my Ferrari or my McLaren, but I do love Williams. So soft spot in my cold heart. All right, well, silence. Let's talk about our tops and bottoms of the week.
Did you just click?
I clicked instead of clapped this week. I thought, you know, be spicy, be different.
Now I have to find a click sound effect.
Well, anyway, Aaron, what was your Superior and what was your El Torazo this week?
Did you just use Google Translate for everything?
Duolingo was not going to help.
The fights you have with that little green bird.
Owl. He's an owl.
Owls are birds.
I should not have assumed its gender actually there too, but it was an owl. Cheeky owl.
Anyway, my top this week is that we're starting to see the drivers are hungry for a win. The drivers are hungry for a first position. They haven't resigned themselves to second place or aiming for second or third. They're now aiming for first place. Like you heard it when they asked Norris over the radio, if we pit now, we can probably cut off George. And Norris came back over the radio and he's like, nah, we're going for Verstappen. The drivers have that ability to hit that first position, and so they're going for it. And you can hear it when they're talking to their engineers.
It's such a nice change compared to last year. Again, every year of Formula One gives you something, but this year is giving you quite a lot. And to hear that drive and that determination to be P1 just makes it so much more exciting. And we've got so many drivers now to go and compete with that. It is fantastic.
Opposite side of that coin is we're starting to hear that Verstappen is pushing himself. Verstappen is trying hard to maintain first position. And if he fucks up, if Red Bull fuck up even slightly, it puts him in danger. Last year, they could have had a 10-second pit stop and it wouldn't have impacted their race. They would have still won.
Yeah.
This year, a 3.5-second pit stop puts a target on their back.
Yeah, but also, you know, I'll talk about it a little bit later, potentially. You know, Verstappen has to work hard there too. You know, he's not just cruising at the start. He has to go and compete, which is exciting for him and it's exciting for us spectators. It's great. What was your El Torazo?
I think at a time when we're talking so much about what's going to happen with the second seat at Red Bull, and we're talking about the fact that Daniel was brought back into RB specifically to move into that seat at some point if he could perform, to then disadvantage him with upgrades that fucked up the car. Yes, they also fucked up for Yuki Tsunoda, but we all know Yuki Tsunoda's not getting a look at that seat. So I think it's disappointing that RB disadvantaged their drivers at a point where they can't afford that from an optics point of view.
I don't know. I've got mixed emotions about the whole Daniel Ricciardo, V-Carb, RB, Red Bull, Perez, Liam Lawson, whatever, right? So I agree that that car is not up to scratch to showcase the brilliance of these two drivers, but they are also a mid-tier team and any performance needs to be good enough to get some points. So
Yeah.
it's a whole team effort here on this weekend, but those drivers are pivotal to make it a success there too.
All right. Well, who are your tops and bottoms of the week?
My top this week will be the first corner overtake by Russell on Norris and Verstappen at the start. I thought it was absolutely brilliant. It set the scene up very well for a very spicy Barcelona Grand Prix. And again, goes to my point, Russell took a bit of that time, watched them battling it out, and it just came on through. Verstappen had to then work to then get that first position, I think was a couple laps in. Great for him, it was only a couple laps, but he has to work hard to go and get P1 now and to go win that race. And it's exciting that it's coming from a number of different drivers, not just Norris.
Yeah, it was lap 3 that he managed to get himself ahead of Russell again. But yeah, that opening scene, watching all 3 drivers get off the line pretty well. And then we're so used to it being Max who is in P1 and Max squeezing out whoever's in that second position and Max defending and doing it really well, moving across the track and all that kind of thing, to watch it then happen to him and also watch him get a little bit antsy on the radio about it, I think was great.
Yeah, and we're going to keep on seeing a lot of dives against Verstappen there too. It just makes things very exciting.
And your bottom?
So my bottom is going to be the reappointment, of Flavio Briatore to Alpine. As I mentioned in the off-track news, I find this a weird hiring for Alpine in general. Again, Alpine previously was Renault. Renault has been part of the championship for many, many years in different forms and formats. And bringing Flavio back makes me question, what's his role? Why are you here? And does this send a really bad look as to your team structure, what you're wanting to go and do to bring someone that was basically put into court from a FIA perspective, came out guilty of orchestrating that alongside with the drivers, etc. So it was a big case. And then years later, you just bring him back in? It is very strange and it irks me a bit. It's not a cool look.
So was it the race that he orchestrated the crash in, or was it the qualifying?
It was the race.
Because I remember there being another story, I couldn't remember if it was related, where there was a driver who got provisional polling Q3 and then their teammate hit a wall. And so their session was yellow flagged and ended under a safety car. So their teammate got pole.
Yeah. Also happened, I think, in Monaco one year with Perez spinning out, right? Which meant he automatically got the pole during qualifying and then Verstappen wasn't able to go and challenge him on that one there too. This tactic occurs, but this one was pretty big to the fact that a driver, whilst it was forced, pretty big crash.
Yeah.
So the safety of a driver was compromised. The fact that it was all orchestrated is just bad sportsmanship. And like I said, I just don't know why now bringing Flavio back. What's the agenda behind Alpine now? What's their role? It gives me more questions about what's happening in that management side of Alpine. Do they even exist next year? I do not know. Is this bring Flavio to get the business up and running in terms of a sell package or?
Well, I believe Renault are bowing out, I think, as the engine manufacturer.
So again, there's rumors going around with Renault not being the preferred engine supplier by Alpine because of their lack of performance. I think it's close to between 4 and 10 kilometers at the top part. So again, it's quite decent, with Alpine being potentially looking into a Mercedes deal as an engine supplier. So for 2026, again, it's just a lot of off-track news typhoon, especially when you add in the things like Ocon being released and going potentially somewhere, and there's a bit of chaos at Alpine. I just don't know what's going on.
Well, we've got a few more weeks before the summer break, so we'll then hopefully see some of the drivers solidify their positions, or at least signs. If we see signs, we'll see all the other drivers just fall into place like dominoes. But
or even Perez,
if he stays.
Yeah, but that could be a thing. Then what happens is a whole movement there too.
Yeah, so it all depends.
Anyway, that brings us to the end of a very spectacular Grand Prix. The start of the triple header was pretty tasty in my opinion. Now make sure you keep up with our Austrian and British episodes being released in the next few days.
As always, you can subscribe to Let's Talk wherever you get your favorite podcasts and leave a review. Think of it as completing your good deed for the week.
If you want to get involved in conversation, come find us on social media at Let's Talk Show. Leave us a comment and let us know your tops and your bottoms of the week. Now, as always, thank you for tuning in. Adios y nos vemos la próxima vez en Let's Toque.
You need to learn a language before you try and speak it.
What do you mean? I think I tried.
This is the same as you're trying for Swedish on Duolingo.
The support I get doing this podcast is something else. Anyway, we'll catch you next week on Let's Talk.
Let's Talk is hosted, produced, and edited by Shaun, Polidano and Aaron Best. Our show is an entertainment podcast. The views expressed by the hosts and guests are for entertainment purposes only. Let's Talk is recorded in Paran in Naarm, Melbourne, and we would like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung and Bunurong people of the East Kulin Nation, the traditional owners of the land. We pay our respects to elders, past, present, and emerging.